So one of the things is you've heard a lot about cloud. It seems to be a buzzword that we have in the channel currently and have had for a good 4, 5, 6 years now. And hopefully you're all very much aware of our Office 365 product that we've launched into the marketplace. So with Azure, it's a great product. So it's in essence, it is part of our Cloud OS platform. So what we've designed, so Microsoft's definition of cloud is very much around any of our products available on pretty much any device and accessible from anywhere, but also being run from anywhere as well. So as a customer, you kind of have the choice of either running wholly on-premise, as you probably have been doing traditionally, looking to move whatever you need to in the cloud and move as much as you need to in the cloud, or what tends to happen at the moment is a lot of customers are running hybrid deployments. So they're moving some workloads into the cloud, offloading data center requirements, instant spiky temporary requirements, and so on in there as they actually need it. So, and what we want to do is actually have that without any kind of loss of functionality of our products. So it's part of what we call our Cloud OS platform, which encompasses Server 2012 as well. And what we want to do is actually get to the stage where you can choose, which we are at the moment, choose where you actually deploy your, for instance, virtual hard drives, your Hyper-V instances that you can then move around, be it through hosters, be it through public cloud such as Azure, or keep it on premise. But you have that transition path available to you to move as when you choose to. So within Azure, within our data centers, we supply the server, the operating system, the power, the cooling, the network connectivity, so all the underlying hardware requirements in there. But we also even will maintain the server for you in most instances as well. So obviously if you provision one of our pieces of software, be it Microsoft Server, even our platform middleware such as SQL databases within Azure, and you choose to consume those via Azure, then we will also maintain those instances for you as well. So do all the security patching on your behalf as well. So again, it takes away a lot of the headache on your behalf in there. But again, it's not just for virtual machines. So this isn't just an infrastructure play within Azure. We actually provision an awful lot of our services that we offer, that a lot of our server products can offer, out via Azure as well. It actually makes it a lot easier on your behalf. So rather than you having to provision virtual machines with server instances and then provision whatever it may be, it could be remote desktop elements to it, it could be disaster recovery and so on, we actually have those products available as services from within Azure as well. So in terms of the economics of Azure, and again, we're seeing this as quite a key strength of Azure and people moving towards it, is it kind of gets away from the big capex project spikes you tend to see of budget getting eaten up on expensive licensing, expensive hardware and tin and so on in there as well. You know, if you're offloading the actual expenditure of the hardware cost onto Microsoft, then you're just paying for the service in itself. And again, so offloading sort of those commodity tasks to Microsoft, so the stuff that you spend potentially as network managers and technical managers out there doing all the firefighting for essentially what could be offloaded into Microsoft. You know, now that could be from a user perspective in terms of password resets and so on. So the kind of churn of day-to-day IT management that you have to be involved in, you can actually offload an awful lot of that into Microsoft and Azure services as well. And again, it's very much a consumption-based billing model. So you only pay for what you use within this. So again, it's moving much more towards IT as a utility as much as gas, water, electricity, for instance, as opposed to having to build your own infrastructure to support that. So again, this is where we're kind of seeing people use this for. So it's very much as an overflow for existing data center or even a replacement. And one of the key drivers we're seeing there at the moment is absolutely around Server 2003, company becoming end of life this July, and actually people not only just testing those applications that are running on O3 boxes now within Azure to see if they actually just run on a later version of our operating system, say 2012, 2008, but also the choice is actually we could actually just keep this in here rather than going out and buying all the additional tin to run it as well. So it really is a very agnostic approach in terms of where you choose to run your applications from within there as well. And again, so if we look at the cloud, as explained earlier, Microsoft's definition is very much you choose the applications and you can choose with no loss of productivity where you actually host that, be it on-premise, hybrid model, or completely in the cloud, be it private cloud, be it hosted model within there with us and with our partners as well. So this also gives you things like global availability as well. So the fact is, within our Azure data centers worldwide, you can provision services as and when you need them. So if you do have, for instance, an office over in Sydney or Hong Kong or New York, no longer do you have to worry about the latency of connections back into local head office back in, say, the UK. You can actually set up services local to themselves as well and just create the virtual network sitting above it within Azure. And it also allows a much faster time to market and to provision your services as well. So again, the old model of buying tin and then waiting for it to be delivered and then having to install an operating system and then patch it up to the latest service pack and hot fixes and so on before you can actually even put whatever software you need to run on there kind of disappears with Azure, because at the end of the day, you choose a virtual machine size, you choose the operating system you want to drop in it, and within 5 minutes you have the Azure Windows Server box ready, opening a remote desktop connection on your desktop, ready to drop in an ISO or an image or whatever else you need to do within there as well. So it's a much faster way of spinning up IT as and when you need it, rather than being reliant on the physical attributes as such. So if we look at the various computing patterns that we're seeing in the marketplace at the moment within IT as well, and again, the more traditional way of buying IT on-premise just means you kind of have to plan for peak performance constantly throughout the year from within here. But that's not necessarily the way people use and consume IT currently. So you've got, for instance, you have cases where people are just using services on and off, and you see that an awful lot within various industries. The fact is, it's supporting the workforce between 9 and 5:30, and this is certainly true of the more traditional industries, manufacturing, warehousing, and even education to a certain extent as well, where it just does not get used overnight or at the weekends, for instance. Then you have the case where actually things are growing fast. So the business itself, or this certain area within one business, is actually growing a lot faster than the rest, and therefore it needs to keep consuming additional IT resources, be it additional hardware, RAM, computing, storage is certainly one of those things as well. Then you have unpredictable bursting in terms of if something happens and you get a huge spike in requirements of IT, which was unheard of, and generally it may well fall over if your website isn't set up for the additional requirements asked of it, or the storage, for instance, has a certain limitation within there. Then again, that's not something you can actually necessarily plan for from within there. And then you have that predictable bursting of understanding as and when over a bit of seasonality thing. So if you're an online retailer and you know you're going to be a lot busier because 80% of your business comes November, December, then you can plan for that accordingly. But again, generally speaking, with the on-premise side, you've bought in all this hardware, which is basically laying idle and not working at capacity for 10 months of the year from within there as well. But it can also be a much shorter span of predictability in terms of that bursting. So for instance, we've got various case studies on our website around these kind of scenarios. I'd say one of the key ones around these are people like UCAS, for instance, the guys who do the university clearing places for students, and they essentially run a very stripped down version of their on-premise IT infrastructure, and they actually use Azure for the key months between June, July, August, September of actually placing students into university, and then they turn off the Azure services come October, and then they just run on their basic on-premise infrastructure, which is basically just doing admin work internally for them until it comes around next May, June time, for instance, when they spin up again for students. And also we have a pretty good case study around someone like, for instance, Aston Martin, who have a huge spike in infrastructure requirement and web traffic when their cars are featured on Top Gear. So rather than what used to happen is they'd actually hire someone to come in and plug in a load of extra physical hardware onto their network, and then 2 weeks later they come and remove it all. They actually just do that all within Azure now. So what happens is they know they're going to be on Top Gear on Monday. They actually basically have Azure ready to go and pre-provisioned to actually scale out with requirements, and then as soon as Top Gear finishes at say 10 o'clock Monday night, they get a huge spike in web traffic and demands and downloads and bandwidth, and then what happens over 2 weeks, that tails off back to normal, and then they just switch off Azure as necessary as well. And then finally, you've got the more traditional 24/7, the fairly steady computing pattern of a fairly constant ask on IT requirements. So again, Within Azure, because it's a consumption-based per minute billing model, and it can also auto scale out as and when necessary, it can absolutely cater to all these needs, and you really are only paying for what's actually necessary from within here. Again, with the on-premise infrastructure, because you're basically planning for peak capacity and you have to have that infrastructure ready, then as you can see on this slide, the yellow black striped area tends to be the maintenance, the payment of the capital expenditure, the firefighting, the keeping the lights on of on-premise infrastructure that you're paying for that is not getting utilized at all. And again, you'll even see that even if it's, say, a seasonal spike where December's a very busy month, but the other 11 months aren't at all. And again, it's just a huge area of IT that's being paid for and maintained that just isn't actually being utilized. So if we look at, again, I apologize that I'm assuming a lot of you probably know this already, but I'll just kind of strip this back in terms of a very brief explanation of Azure that we have here. So what we do is, on the left-hand side where we have the physical, and this is obviously the service delivery model. So the physical, be it standalone box or virtualization, either through Microsoft, VMware, Citrix, which has been prevalent over the last 10, 15 years, generally means you're provisioning all of that yourself. So the hardware, the tin, the networking layer, the storage, operating. Hi, apologies for that. I'm not entirely sure what happened there. So can I just get a quick IM to say that I'm still back on now? All okay, fantastic. Many apologies. So again, you've got the physical and the virtualization, which is very much the physical side from yourselves as network managers and so on, in terms of provisioning every single aspect from within there. So physical, virtual, from within there, and you're managing the entire stack up to the application level, right down from the hardware level. On the far right-hand side, the software as a service element, which then generally tends to be our Office 365 platform, just means that actually us at Microsoft, the vendor, is managing every single aspect, be it the hardware layer, software operating underneath layer, the middleware layer, and the software requirement on top delivery to yourselves as customers. And where Azure fits in is actually just the infrastructure as a service element, the middle box, where basically you're renting out our compute power. So you're just renting out space in our data center. So that will be our compute layer of RAM, hard drive storage, for instance, and processor power, and then you choose what software you layer into that. But the advantage we have very much at Microsoft, as I alluded to earlier with the various services we offer based on it, is because an awful lot of the software that you'll run on that data center space you rent out from us happens to be Microsoft as well, and some of the tools you'll use within, say, the server operating system. We also operate very well in the platform as a service space as well. So in terms of the actual hosted services we deliver out to customers and yourselves as well as users from within here. And again, so one of our major players in the infrastructure space would be the likes of AWS and Google, but they don't really play in the platform space. They tend to give you, here's the compute layer, here's, say, an operating system if you want it, and that's as far as it goes. What we do in Microsoft is you get all that, but you can easily move and integrate also all the various services we offer around disaster recovery and backup and storage and application delivery that's in there as well. So again, taking that back to where we talk about service delivery, again, making it quite simplified. On the left-hand side, on the physical elements, be it physical or virtualized infrastructure, you're managing every single element from the hardware layer, the network layer, the storage, the middleware, the operating system, right up to the application. And at the end of the day, if all you're being tasked to do is deliver that application out to a multitude of devices and a multitude of users, it's only really the top layer, the top box, the application that generally counts. What comes underneath it is just all additional management on your behalf. So as we move into the infrastructure as a service layer, be it via Azure, then we manage the hardware elements of it, and you just manage the operating system middleware application. And then as we move over to the platform as a service element, then actually provisioning our data center space on Azure with the operating system and, say, SQL middleware within there as well, just means you're just dropping in the application that you've developed or you've bought in to actually put within Azure, and that's the only piece you actually need to manage, i.e. update and roll out from within there. And then finally on the right hand side, software as a service, obviously we as the vendor in the Office 365 proposition, we actually manage every single element right up to the actual software delivery out to the end user. So in terms of the stats we have around Azure, again, I'll just give you a quick idea of the scalability that we have Azure. Is we have 19 Azure data regions worldwide. An additional 4 have been brought on within the last 5-6 months or so in India and Australia. And this is a picture we have, an actual photo of our data center that we have. So it's probably not the futuristic room you're expecting of various rack-mounted blades that you have. We basically prefabricate data centers within shipping containers, bring them over, stack them up, plug them in, and they're all individual self-contained fault-tolerant units contained with power and cooling that we basically just plug in from within there as well. So out of our data center regions, each region contains up to 16 data center buildings, and our locations that we have here that you probably...
Hi Adrian, sorry to interrupt. It seems as though the slides haven't moved on. Are you moving them on from your end? Because from my view, and I think a couple of the other guys' view, it's evolving options for service delivery still showing.
Oh, apologies. Hold on. There we go. Apologies, I was clicking it myself and I didn't have clicked the return to presenters view when I had that interruption.
Great stuff.
Apologies all.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, as I was discussing, obviously the different elements and the manageability within the service delivery, and then a discussion about the data center. There's the photo of our data center with all the various shipping containers up there from within there. So again, our data center regions located in Europe are in Amsterdam and Dublin. So Dublin is our primary data center. We have
Sorry, Adrian. It seems
yes.
to be that it's not moving on. It's still just showing the evolving options for service.
Okay. I'm just taking over as here because I believe you had control.
That may well be it. Okay.
So let's check. Right, is that?
We are on cloud computing.
Excellent. Now we're on Azure Map.
Yep, great stuff.
Excellent. Okay, apologies all.
Thank you.
So here we go. So here's the photo we have of our data centers I mentioned with our shipping containers stacked up from within there. So as I mentioned, our data centers are in Dublin primarily, and Amsterdam tends to be our failover. We have no current plans to have a UK data center. So again, if you have absolute requirements to host information that can't leave the UK for legal reasons, then Azure isn't necessarily going to be the product for you in terms of hosting and holding that information. But again, that's where you would potentially keep it on premise, for instance, or work with Nexus in terms of finding out the best solution for that play. But again, if you don't have those restrictions, then absolutely. What we have is each region contains up to 16 data center buildings. So for instance, Dublin in itself. Each data center building is the size of a football field, which quite comfortably holds, say, 2 jumbo jets on. So just the scale of just an individual region, such as Dublin, just means we've got over 500,000 servers available, which you can then utilize and actually start to enjoy some of the economies of scale in the economics that we run from within there. So another query I get is very much around, well, Azure seems quite new. There seem to have been other players who have been in the marketplace longer than yourself, namely the likes of AWS, who have been gaining various traction before Azure really came into market. But that's not necessarily true in the fact that Microsoft in itself have actually been delivering cloud services out into the marketplace for over 20 years now. So you go back to the likes of Hotmail and MSN that we've been delivering, then these were in place 15, 20 years ago. So these are all hosted on essentially Azure before it was called Azure. It just means now we've actually given it a name and allowed it to go out to end users within the last 4 years. Doesn't necessarily mean we started from scratch. So we have a very long pedigree of actually delivering cloud enterprise grade data center services out to various consumers, be it paid, be it free from within there as well. And if we look at some of the stats specifically around Azure as well, we've got over something like 3 trillion objects now we have hosted within the Azure platform worldwide, for instance. As a company, if you're thinking, well, I've only really come across Azure and heard about it the last sort of year, 18 months, I'm not sure if it's necessarily a mature enough platform to support my business. Probably the key stat is the top left-hand corner where it says 57% of the Fortune 500 are currently using Azure. So more than half of the top 500 companies listed in America, North America, are currently consuming Azure services. So it's a product that is mature and has been out in the marketplace and has been adopted across from top enterprises right down to, as I said, the small 1-2 user bands that are out there. And what's quite key when I was discussing about Microsoft playing in the infrastructure element as well as the platform, and we're quite unique in that play, certainly up against competitors, and this slide kind of illustrates that to a point as well. So if I bring up some Gartner Magic Quadrants around on-premise virtualization, around infrastructure as a service, around storage, around application delivery via the cloud, then you'll notice in the leaders quadrant, the top right hand, which is obviously completeness of vision compared to ability to execute, you've got 2 players in each of those. Microsoft are in the leaders quadrant for all 4, but what's quite key is actually you've got different competitors of ours who have joined us in that leaders quadrant. So you have Amazon in the infrastructure, you have the Salesforce in the platform, the enterprise application platform, and you have VMware who are there with us in the virtualization platform. But going back to when I was talking about Microsoft actually in a hybrid model, we give you the flexibility to move your applications wherever you need to. This actually talks to that quite well, because it just means you can start off with Microsoft as your virtualization platform, and we make it very easy for you to then transition into the cloud without having to go to a different vendor, a different management portal, different conversion tools, for instance, to actually migrate and move things around from within there as well. So again, if you look at potentially Microsoft as your on-premise virtualization platform, then it makes it very easy to actually start to migrate some of that into the cloud as and when you require, without having to go through different licensing models, different vendors, different tools as well, and certain incompatibilities that might come from it as well. So I'm hoping everyone on the calls had a look on the Azure website, maybe even spun up a few things, had a go on the trial credit that we actually allow you to use when you go on the website. What I would say is, though, it can be quite daunting when you go on there, because we have a whole host of services. We've got about 35 different services hosted within Azure now. It's not just virtual machines. We have things talking about BizTalk Server, HD Insights, machine learning, and so on. And these are quite key for bespoke projects up in the higher end enterprise market, but aren't necessarily going to be fitting in the sub 1,000 seat SMB, customer SME market that we have at the moment. So I'd suggest actually an awful lot of those can be useful and may well come up useful if you're doing media streaming services worldwide, for instance, and a big launch of a new product, the likes of Dyson, who came to us to do this, for instance. But an awful lot of that actually you shouldn't really concern yourselves with. If we look at actually the key workloads and scenarios around SME customers that we're seeing the uptake right now, I'd say actually these are Azure as a solution to certain key customer problems that have been around for many years for now. So we're looking at, for instance, around backup, scheduled backup recovery of data. We're looking at disaster recovery using Azure for this. We're looking at deployment in VMs of on-premise workloads, but also application delivery back out as well, in terms of supporting the new world of work with BYOD, people working from home, people accessing from various different devices. And then what I'd say also we're seeing is an awful lot of uptake in terms of the identity piece within Azure as well. So Azure Active Directory, which will run alongside your current on-premise Active Directory, and actually just allows you a lot more flexibility in terms of identity and accessing software as a service applications, and not just Microsoft's, they say through Office 365, but over 2,500 partners that we have, the likes of Google and Salesforce and so on, who have all created single sign-on applications via Azure Active Directory. And I think you'll also see a bigger uptake of this coming out this year, certainly around the release of Windows 10 when that comes out later on this year, because right now you have the ability to log in to your devices via an Azure Active Directory username and password. So essentially your Office 365 username and password as well, if you have one of those. So that actually makes it a lot easier when you log into your device. You also are automatically logged into all your software application logins as well from within there. So if I just have a quick dive into each of these as well. So if we look at actually the relationship between the different elements of this. So again, we don't just say, here's a load of storage and you kind of work out how you're going to manage that from within there. Sure, we have basic blob storage, and as you can see, the price that we have, which is the retail price, as it were, is 1.5p a gigabyte. So it's a very cheap way of actually storing documents, for instance, from a compliance perspective, basically just taking over from tape maybe as your long-term retention policy if you need to look after data for 7-8 years, for instance, for compliance purposes. Even our basic storage, that 1.5p a gigabyte, we actually replicate your data 3 times in our data center in Dublin, for instance, on completely different fault tolerance lines. So again, if one was to go down, one storage area with your data in, there are 2 others completely separate silos which have your copies of data in there as well. But again, what it kind of comes down to is almost an SLA of that data, because you can offload that data because you don't need to access it. But it may be the case that you want to have that geo-redundant backup of data, so it's off-premise in case something happens on-premise, but you need that kind of scheduling because it's constantly changing and evolving in terms of accessing that data. So we have our Azure Backup tool, for instance, which again is showing there at 13p a gigabyte currently, where we actually include the software element from within there as well, and the scheduling and the recovery from within there, various restore points. And then finally on the right hand side, it's all very well, say, having offsite backup, but if you actually need to recover pretty quickly, i.e. be back up and running in the case of a server failure within, say, 15 minutes, then we have a ready-built Azure disaster recovery platform service available as well, which again works out much cheaper from an operational expense point of view, where you can see there the top end price is £34 a virtual machine per month, to have that kind of monitored, highly available solution available to you via Azure, as opposed to the more traditional on-premise clustered servers, SANs, networking layer, potentially VMware licensing and so on from within there as well, just to enable that kind of highly available, one server fails, the other server actually picks up the workload automatically. So if I go into these individually from here, and again, I'd say these pretty much cover easily 90% of the workloads that are being sold under Azure at the moment. So first off, I would say is look at our backup solution. So what we see certainly in the SME space is most customers certainly have a backup solution in play. But what we see, it tends to be on-premise. So it's tape drive, they're switching tapes, say 7 tapes every single day, just to have that continuity of data resilience from within there. But it still tends to be on-premise. It's still not necessarily covering you if something, God forbid, something awful happens to the office, be it burns down, floods, someone comes in, steals all kinds of IT out in there as well. So Microsoft Azure Backup actually allows you convenient offsite replication. So it's based on our System Center Data Protection Manager product. So you get a cut down version of that agent included in that price of 13p a gigabyte. And what it means is you basically can then set up, and this is server workloads and also client workloads as well. So Windows 7, Windows 8 devices, you can also back up from within here. And then you can just schedule to back up every day at 5:30 or every Friday at 5 o'clock, for instance. So you can have that continuity of backing up on a very regular, every 15 minutes, every day or every month, however you wish necessary. Now, last week, we actually updated the service. So it moved up from 9 years of retention to 99 years of retention now. So I can't see where that would necessarily come into play right now necessarily, but if you have those long-term retention needs, then absolutely you could look at Azure Backup to kind of replace that tape that you may have on premise at the moment. We also have more flexible retention policies as of last week as well. So what you can do is you can say, right, back up every single day, but the last backup of every month, the last Friday of every month, I need to be able to keep that data for 10 years, for instance. So you've got that daily backup for resilient purposes, but you also have where it's taking one backup a month, for instance, taking it and keeping that for a lot longer retention period. So you have that for compliance purposes from within there as well. So right now it's a files and folders backup. So it doesn't necessarily recover system state of entire virtual hard drives and so on. So it's not necessarily going to take the place of a disaster recovery solution yet. But we have an update coming out in a couple of weeks again of this. And again, Azure is a very flexible platform where we are actually constantly updating the service on a very regular basis, so that in a couple of weeks' time, we're actually going to release an update where it will back up Hyper-V virtual hard drives, for instance, so you will actually be able to recover those when you bring them back down as well. We're also going to allow Azure Backup to actually back up Azure virtual machines as well, because one of the things that we are hearing from the marketplace is it's all very well that you offer an SLA within Azure virtual machines if we move a workload up there, but it's still not going to protect us from a fat finger delete of someone who actually deletes a critical system file, for instance, or you get hit by crypto locker or whatever else it may actually be of that virtual machine in Azure. So by allowing Azure Backup to also now monitor and protect Azure virtual machine workloads, just means you have those restore points available to you as well, so just in case something should happen to that virtual machine. So again, fantastic product, a very low cost of entry from within here. There's no architecting needed. You don't need to create VLANs or anything particularly complicated. It really is, you point it at a server workload or you point it at client workloads. You say backup on this particular day and you get charged just for the amount of data of gigabytes that we're actually recovering and storing from within Azure as well within there. So great, Azure Backup. If we actually look at the virtual machine element, so again, if you're looking at going down a virtual machine element within Azure, and again, you go online and take a look at all the various options, and you'll actually see 2 or 3 different levels of Azure virtual machines from within there, and you'll also see within those particular categories various different sizes and prices and so on that is in there, priced out at a per hour price and per month in there as well. But in essence, it's not actually too much different to how you currently quote with and how you currently purchase on-premise hardware, because all you're doing is buying the compute elements and they're already preset and pre-configured within Azure. So you don't get full flexibility of choosing, oh, this processor speed and I need this amount of RAM. You get pre-configured sets. So for instance, in this case of this sale, you've got an Azure medium virtual machine, which is a dual core 4 gigs of RAM. So what we'd consider a fairly bog standard compute set, and that's your compute power, and then you choose storage, basically the online hard drive element, to attach to that compute power, and in this case Azure Blob Storage 1 terabyte, which is 1.5p per gigabyte, as we mentioned earlier, so that terabyte will cost you £15 a month. So that virtual machine, the compute element, the medium virtual machine, is 11.5p an hour, £86 a month for 24/7 usage. But as with all these things, they're billed per minute, so we actually just put in hours a month just so it makes it easier for you to calculate how much it will cost for budgetary reasons, but you only actually get used for per minute usage of this. So if you just need to spin up a virtual machine for 30 minutes, you can absolutely do that, and you will only be billed for, let's say in this case it would be 6 pence, for instance, for that, spinning it up for 30 minutes. If, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of where you have those different spikes in IT usage, and let's say you want to shut it down over the weekend because it's just supporting your workforce on-premise Monday to Friday, then right there you've taken out 2 days a week of 2/7 of cost of your Azure as well, and your billing will be reflected accordingly as well. So although we say in this case you're going to have that combined price of the virtual machine, of the compute power and the storage, happens to be £101 estimated monthly burn rate, that's basically the worst case scenario should you use it for 24/7 and you consume all 1 terabyte of storage as well. The reality is that you're not going to actually put in a complete 1 terabyte of storage. You may only put in 100 gigs. You've just got a 1 terabyte cap, because again, even with storage, you may say I want to provision 1 terabyte of storage disk with this virtual machine, but you only actually get charged for the storage data you actually put in there. So you're basically, that storage you're allocating is just a hard cap that you're setting. You don't get charged for the full terabyte. You only get charged for the data you put in there. Within there. So if you only put in 100 gigs of files, you only get charged a tenth of that price within there. So you only get charged the £1.50 for the month, not the 15. So again, the storage you actually provision is not what you pay for. You only pay for the storage you actually populate from within there. So again, it makes it nice and easy in terms of just choosing off the rack this size of virtual machine, this amount of storage that I want with it, and then that's pretty much it. But if we kind of go beyond that, and again, from the service element point of view in terms of what you're actually going to be doing with that virtual machine, again, if we look at some of the challenges you have around actually the modern way of work is changing. You're not siloed anymore where people do come in 9 to 5. They've got one device that they access their corporate information from, and then they go home and that's it. They don't work from home, they don't have any other devices, no other operating systems and so on. It's changed a lot now. People, not even from a BYOD perspective where they want to use their own devices and they can do that and work from home and log in remotely, but also just the range of devices supported within an organization. So you think of smartphones, for instance, the different operating systems there, be it Droid, be it iOS, be it Windows Phone, from within that, all accessing emails. They can access files, do edit files on the fly via Office 365, for instance. And so supporting that and managing that becomes quite a problem for any technical manager out there. And most people tend to either lock it down or they open it up and just don't have any kind of security policies in play from within there. So how do you, for instance, deliver applications across various platforms and from various locations outside of the office? We look at also access to legacy applications as well that you may have that you're looking to phase out, but it's still going to take 4, 5, 6 years to actually be able to do that. And how you, as an IT manager, actually manage all this, and it doesn't consume your all daily tasks of basically firefighting and keeping the lights on of these services from within there as well. So what I say we also allow you to do is if we look at, say, the virtualization aspect and actually application delivery. Again, this is a fairly complicated slide in here, so I won't dwell on it too much. It's just going to illustrate on the left-hand side is more the old way of work of the on-premise. So if you wanted to deliver applications, desktops remotely on-premise, fine, you can do that, but it does require hardware infrastructure. It requires various licensing of, be it Microsoft, be it third-party product from without there, and also the various edge protection and identity and federation involved from within there as well, just to be able to access corporate resources from outside of head office, for instance. And this is actually where it kind of, on the right-hand side, if we move more into the Azure service element, then it can make life an awful lot easier in terms of allowing Microsoft to do an awful lot of that workflow for you. And the one I kind of really want to pick up on is the box on the right hand side, so Azure Remote App. So we're not, again, talking about how you could create a virtual machine and you could provision the remote desktop element from within there and the remote app and do it all manually, but we actually have Azure Remote App as a service in itself. So if your goal is essentially delivering an application to your users, then we have a service already built in Azure Remote App that allows you to do that. So essentially what it's going to allow you to do is roll out applications via our remote desktop protocol capabilities hosted on Azure, and it just means that taking it off premise and off your local IT infrastructure makes it a lot easier for remote workers to manage to access it via the internet from within there, because they're accessing it via our Azure data centers. So the remote app experience essentially means it will automatically scale as necessary with the amount of users you have. So again, you don't have to build a remote desktop server, a remote app server with full capability. Azure Remote App will automatically scale to users and workloads asked of it. And it also allows you access to corporate apps from anywhere on any device. So it can be smartphones, it can be various tablets, it can be Windows devices out there as well. And allows you to centralize and protect that corporate information as well through remote rights management, for instance, if you need to. But you can essentially manage it from your one Azure portal as an IT admin without having to log into various servers that's in there. So if we again look at the remote app service in itself, so what it does is it will provision the remote app service. You upload your application gallery template, and then your users can essentially log in to whatever the applications you've chosen to be delivered out there. So we have our remote desktop application available not just on Windows but Mac OS, on iOS and Droid as well. So you can actually access these applications from Droid tabs or iPads or Windows devices or smartphones from within there as well. It uses our remote desktop protocol, which is obviously what we use on premise, and also the remote FX technology. So it gives you a really high fidelity experience of sound 3D graphics as well, should you have that kind of application that requires quite a heavy workload of graphics and sound from within there as well. And again, you can choose to have a flexible hybrid deployment rather than actually migrating it all into the cloud. So you can have a full-on cloud application delivery experience, but actually if you want control of various bespoke applications still on premise, you can actually just use Azure Remote App as your remote desktop gateway, as it were, to actually deliver those apps out to your users and your employees that are actually out there as well. And this is all wrapped up within a per user licensing scheme as well. So again, there's no complicated licensing involved here. Within Azure, it really is a per user price, the capped price. So again, worst case scenario here is £15 per user per month for heavy usage of 24/7 all month costs from within there. So basic price is going to look at £9.50 per user, but the maximum capped price we will charge will be £15 per user from within there as well, for the experience of us offloading that whole application delivery out to many devices and many users from whatever location from within Azure. So it's a great service that I'd highly recommend you look at if you're looking to actually think about how you deliver out, enable access to your employees from various locations and various devices as well, without the headache of capital expenditure and management on your behalf. And then I'd say this is probably the one Azure product that does actually excite me a lot more than any other one, simply because of the economics involved and what currently goes on currently when we look at disaster recovery and highly available solutions. So if we think about currently how you provision on-premise disaster recovery, say yourself, you're thinking, well, we have these applications and it's critical, we can't just back them up and lose 8 hours of data and spend half a day or a day or 2 days provisioning the backup. You know, it's critical to our business. So what tends to happen is you buy another server and then you cluster those and you buy the additional licenses for the operating systems on server 2, and then you may well buy VMware licensing, and then you buy a 20 grand SAN to sit in the middle of it and all the additional networking, and suddenly that high availability product of business continuity, i.e. ensuring that these apps on this server also run on this server should server 1 fail, is suddenly a 30-40 grand plus project to actually enable you to do that. Azure, again, we have a service ready built on our Azure platform which will actually enable you to do this at a much less OPEX cost that we have. So again, allows you to deliver that disaster recovery plan into the business. So again, if we look at the various levels as accorded to and defined by the Share Standards group of disaster recovery tiers, and it starts off at tier 0 and tier 1, where basically there's no kind of plan, there's no backup, and it stretches right up to tier 7 of highly automated business integrated solution of, you know, zero data loss, instant automatic recovery from within there. And Azure Site Recovery actually is pretty much considered a tier 7 solution, so it allows you that business continuity without the huge capital expenditure on premise. So if I give you an idea of actually what that situation looks like and how it actually operates at the moment. So what it actually does is it will allow you to replicate your virtual machines up into Azure, and Azure will then act as your recovery site, your colo, your geo-redundant recovery site should the server fail. So we also allow it to act as kind of like the witness server in an on-premise solution. So again, if you don't want that kind of you need that automated failover switching, but you still want it on premise, then Azure Site Recovery at current pricing is about £10 per virtual machine, will actually do the automatic switching for you. It will do the heartbeat technology, and if server 1 fails or virtual machine fails, it will automatically switch it over to server number 2, for instance. And it will do that either via SAN replication if you do have an on-premise SAN, but it will also do it using the Hyper-V replica technology inbuilt from server 2012 as well. So again, if you're using Microsoft, and as I was explaining earlier, if you look at better Microsoft from the on-premise virtualization platform, the technology we've built within there, such as the Hyper-V asynchronous replication technology, can be leveraged by things such as Azure Site Recovery without the need of that expensive tier 1 storage SAN solution from within there as well. So it will do on-premise to on-premise protection via site recovery, but and it will also do that from within VMware environment as well, via a company we purchased last year called InMage, which is also integrated into our Azure Site Recovery solution. So we don't necessarily just manage our Hyper-V. We're not being proprietary by saying you have to go Microsoft to get this technology. If you currently have a VMware infrastructure, and even at quite a low level, so you don't have all the vMotion enabled and expensive vSphere licensing, you can actually enable that via our Azure services. But the exciting part is absolutely this. So it's on-premise replication into Azure. So let's say you may well have 4 applications, for instance, and you say we have to have these protected. We need these to have highly available, and then you get that infrastructure project and the architecting it, and it involves SANs and server 2s and networking switching and so on, and obviously many tens of thousands of pounds to allow you to do that. How Azure Site Recovery works is it will actually replicate those virtual machines up into Azure. It will heartbeat with those virtual machines. Should the heartbeat get terminated, so it gets cancelled, it doesn't actually receive the ping back, then it will automatically provision the copies of those virtual machines into an Azure virtual machine, and then it will have a VPN gateway into your premise as well. So it then takes over, becoming the production use environment. And again, that's all within Azure without the need for that additional on-premise hardware. So it's quite a nice, easy, compatible setup you can have and offer out and have a high available solution to your business and supporting yourselves without the need for the capital expenditure. So historically, this product's been out for a year, but you needed Microsoft System Center to be able to do this. That was acting as the brains in terms of the replication and recovery elements from within there. But that wasn't necessarily enabling it to be taken up too well, simply because System Center, is a great product, but obviously it's not particularly a company-wide. It's not that many companies necessarily use it, and it's seen as much more of an enterprise product within there. As of middle of December, though, we actually announced you can now use Azure Site Recovery on pure Hyper-V hosts without the need for any additional hardware licensing or hardware in there as well. So if you just have a Server 2012 virtual host, then that will work with Azure Site Recovery to enable your virtual machine host, which can run on Server 2008 R2 and above. So it's not like every operating system has to be the latest one, just the actual host with the Hyper-V role enabled to actually have that communication with Azure. And then that will actually allow you to have that heartbeat technology and allow high available solution into Azure purely on a Hyper-V host machine. So you can actually set this up right now and have that business continuity built in at that price of £34 a virtual machine per month. And again, what's coming out very soon in another couple of months or so is the ability to have that Azure Site Recovery on VMware hosts as well. So I appreciate an awful lot of you are probably using VMware currently, but if you don't have the SAN replication and vMotion and so on enabled, that highly available solution enabled right now, then give it a couple more months or so, and then we'll actually enable you to be able to run that via Azure as well, via our InMage Scout technology, the company I mentioned that we procured last year to enable us to work with conversion into Azure from VMDK images. So I'm pretty excited about this product because it allows, it enables high availability business continuity to companies with very little architecting involved and very little capital expenditure, if any at all, and a great price as well. So when I was talking about £34 a virtual machine per month, to protect a 4-host Hyper-V server in this model is going to cost you £140 per month. Plus additional storage of those VMs at 1.5p a gigabyte and so on. But essentially, it's going to come in at under £200 or so a month from within there, which makes it a very cheap, a very robust solution for your business without having to go down the whole architecting solution of on-premise expensive hardware. So just as some very rough product guides in terms of pricing, if you've had a look at this and you think, okay, we're looking at building in additional data resiliency in terms of offloading some of this into, say, a cloud platform, then a backup solution of, let's just say, 100 gigabytes on that file share or that NAS drive or whatever else you may have will just cost you, for 100 gigabytes times the 13p at 12, it'll cost you £150 ballpark figure a year. looking at the site recovery on the virtual machine, and what I've done is I've actually built in worst case scenario by a long way on this one. So that virtual machine protected, plus the bandwidth cost, and also you get charged for virtual machine usage when you invoke the disaster recovery. So I've put in an additional couple of weeks in there as well. It's coming out at about £700 a year for that within there. And again, the cost of running actually a complete application, an app in Azure, in a virtual machine, a standard virtual machine with the bandwidth and the storage and the VPN gateway is going to cost you about, say, £1,400 a year. But again, what's good about this is, again, there's no power needed, there's no cooling, there's no on-premise hardware required here, and it also includes all the licensing as well. So when we look at that virtual machine at that £1,400, there's no server licensing because it's included in the cost. It's also unlimited connection via the CALs as well, so you don't need to concern yourself with those either. When I was discussing the remote app solution, for instance, and talking about that £15 per user pricing, that also includes all the cost of the licensing and bandwidth in there as well. So there are no additional costs needed from there as well. It includes the RDS CAL licensing, which trips up an awful lot of end users as well, that you may need to enable a terminal server environment in there as well. So what Azure does very well is actually you have the whole infrastructure, so you can build your own virtual network and virtual LAN and attach it to your own on-premise network very well. But also the services we offer. So if you're thinking about specifically, well, actually, we could sharpen up. We need a better disaster recovery plan. We need a better backup plan. We need a better way to outreach to our employees in terms of accessing our applications from home on a various range of devices and operating systems. Azure have those services pre-packaged and pre-built, ready for you to utilize in your company. And again, I think the final couple of slides are coming up now, but going back and referring to the identity piece, and again, this will only take me a couple of minutes to run through this because I think this is more of a futures thing, but it is becoming more and more prevalent right now, is that actually accessing very many software applications via a whole host of vendors on various locations and various devices just means you have a whole host of passwords and connections involved in here. And from an IT management perspective, that can be really difficult. You just have this huge sprawl of management that you have to be aware of. And what you're looking to do is actually push as much of it off to be self-service as possible, but without the ability that you're just going to get hundreds of phone calls constantly saying, I've forgotten my password for our Twitter account, or I've forgotten it for this particular product or Salesforce or whatever else it may actually be. And again, so where Azure Active Directory comes into it, and again, Azure Active Directory has a free version which you can use right now and just trial and play around with and sort of pilot. And then we have a paid for version of Premium which allows you for unlimited applications and much more granular control. But what we're looking for is identity as the control plane, where you have your on-premise, so you have your Active Directory, so that doesn't go away from within there. Then you can have other directories if necessary on your on-premises, and then you have your whole cloud offering, so be it Microsoft 365, be it Google Apps and Salesforce and Dropbox and a whole host of various e-commerce platforms and so on out there, various amounts of software as a service applications. And what happens is Azure Active Directory, so an Active Directory that also sits within Azure, which you can easily connect to your on-premise Active Directory, so just through ADFS, for instance, if you want full two-way communication, or you can just sync it for one-way communication. Just means actually your on-premise will talk to Azure Active Directory, and your Azure Active Directory is the link, the bridge to all of those software as a service applications through, as I said, multiple vendors. And you can even create a link to your own bespoke package that you may well have delivered yourself as well. So you're not limited just by the ones that we have, the 2,500 that we have in our gallery. They're just the pre-built, click on here to drop it into your single sign-on portal for your users. You can also just easily create one of those for yourself for your users as well. So it gives that single sign-on through your users one Azure Active Directory username and password, and then you've set it up so that actually the password maintenance is all managed in the background. So that's good from a users aren't going to bother you for password reset because they can't remember the 10, 15 different passwords they may have across all the various different applications they access. But it's also pretty useful from a security point of view because, for instance, if you've got, let's say a good example, this would be something like Twitter. Most companies have a Twitter presence, but they only have one username and password for the company. So again, how many people in a company, if someone leaves who knows that username for Twitter, and when they leave the business, do they automatically change the username and password for instance, Twitter? Within Azure Active Directory, you can set up a single sign-on into Twitter for your users who need access to it. But seeing as you're the only person who actually accessed and input the username and password for Twitter, your users never even need to know what the password access is into your Twitter account, because they only ever access it via their Azure Active Directory username and password. So again, when they leave, you can just scrub them off your Azure Active Directory, and then they lose access to all your software as a service applications as well, without that kind of security leak of having to worry about, oh, we need to change our internal username and passwords as well for those applications. So it's good from a user perspective of a one single sign-on login, but it can also tie into a security policy as well from yourselves. So again, it can be very much a self-service provisioning in terms of self-service password reset, self-service password change from within there as well for Azure Active Directory. So it takes an awful lot of the workload off you as IT admins. So final couple of slides coming up. Azure is available through volume licensing through your reseller, so via Nexus, for instance, and in essence, it makes it very easy. There's no real licensing requirements here other than you just buy credit from, say, Nexus. So if you say, right, we spec'd out and we're going to be spending £1,000 a month on these various different Azure services, how do we license it? It's very simple. You buy Azure credit via your reseller, and it will basically top up your portal by that amount, and whatever Azure services you use just drains down that credit, either slow or off as fast as necessary. So it's like a mobile phone top up. You know, the more calls and texts you make, the faster it drains down before you have to top it up. Very similar premise with Azure in volume licensing. So you don't have to worry about any kind of complicated licensing requirements, or even that your reseller needs to know about it. It really is as simple as we need X amount of Azure credit to last us for the next 3, 6, 9 months, for instance, from within there. And again, so that Azure credit, as soon as you redeem it, will last for 12 months in that respect. Great. So I'd say no presentation's probably complete without a quote from some famous dead guy, which you can shoehorn into whatever you're trying to talk about, and this one's no exception. So I've got Mark Twain here, who basically discusses the secret of getting ahead is getting started, and the secret of getting started is breaking those tasks down to smaller ones. And what I see quite often when I talk to customers and go out and start to spec out their system, what they should be using, what they could offload into Azure, is they just look at Azure as this one big amorphous product and try and spend months getting their heads around it. But what you should be looking at is actually, if you have a business need right now, or you have an area of business that you can see it being improved in, and essentially looking back at that backup, disaster recovery, identity, application delivery element, if you've got one of those areas you think actually we could be better in that, or we need to integrate that, just start with that. Look at that product, test that, run a POC on that, discuss it with Nexus, and just look at integrating and bringing that one particular area into your business before you start to look into all the other areas necessary as well. You know, it's just very much a question of we have this need for this right now. You can do that within Azure right now. Worry about what else Azure can do for you after that in that respect from within there. So great. The last steps I'd recommend on this is absolutely sign into the Azure account. So you have some funding there available. So it's about £125 of Azure you can use within the first 30 days. So you can spin up virtual machines, set up some kind of infrastructure and just play around with it just to get an idea of how easy it is. And again, it's a 6-click operation to create a virtual machine with server 2012 in there, for instance. You know, it's not a difficult process by any means. If you've got any MSDN, so obviously our developer toolkit, Visual Studio, if you've got any MSDN subscribers, you also get additional credit per month on there as well, which you can utilize internally. I'd say discuss your requirements, your business requirements with Nexus. And they'll be able to help proposition whether Azure is a suitable fit and what particular solution would they be able to do that. And again, I'll be able to support Nexus on that as well if you do have any pressing inquiries that you may want to look at that. And then, you know, look to run that kind of the POC on the Azure services, look to bring in a disaster recovery solution. Is it going to work with this particular business need I have right now? And then obviously the final stage is actually let's move that workload over into Azure. You know, and you can run that hybrid environment. You can just move a DC into Azure just to see if it runs perfectly well with your on-premise Active Directory and you're comfortable with Azure as a service before necessarily you migrate everything in there as well. So great. Thanks a lot for your time on that. I don't think I've overrun particularly. That's pretty much covered the hour. I'm quite happy to take any queries if you've got any that you want to kind of type out at all from within here. If not, then I'm more than happy, as I said, to have a discussion with any of yourselves via Nexus, for instance, if you have any particular Azure needs right now, or coming up in the next sort of month or two as well from within here. So great. Thanks a lot for your time. And I said I'll take any questions if they come up now, or I said hopefully Nexus and work with them, and they'll be able to help you further as well. Apologies, it bombed me out again from my end. I've got a query regarding is there any educational discount? So currently there isn't any educational discount right now, simply because it's running on our hardware internal services. So I'm not aware of any plans to bring it in, but you can absolutely integrate it so into any open value subscription agreement that you have with Microsoft. You can have a separate agreement purely for Azure, for instance, and just buy an Azure credit through there. But right now, there is no education specific discount. The PowerPoint, I'm more than happy. I will share that with Nexus and they will be able to share it out with yourselves as well from within there. I'll also send out a whole host of links that we have as well, which you can then start to dig into as necessary if you want to actually explore any of the areas further. Excellent. Okay. Well, I guess I'll pass it back on to Chris to kind of wrap this up then and bookend it from that side. Chris?
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Adrian. This very much appreciated all your time on this morning, and really great content. We will Nexus will be following this up with an email, which will include the PowerPoint, a link to the recording, and the suggested links that Adrian alluded to there. If there will remain on the call for the next 5-10 minutes. If there are any further questions, please feel free to ask them. Alternatively, again, get in contact with us, and if we can immediately answer them, we'll engage with Adrian to do so. Thank you all again for your time this morning.